Hi, I'm Jim Brett, President and CEO of the New England Council. Thanks for tuning in to this month's episode of Inside the Corner Office, where we catch up with the leaders of some of our region's most well-respected businesses and organizations to learn more about their career paths and about the institutions they lead. This month, I had the pleasure of speaking with John O'Brien, the newly appointed CEO of JERA Americas. We discussed John's early career in the Massachusetts Legislature, where he served in the state Senate, as well as JERA Americas' expanding footprint in New England. John also shared his insights on how the shift in priorities under the new administration could impact federal energy investments moving forward. As always, I thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this episode. John, thanks so much for taking time to join me today. And let me be one of the first to congratulate you on your brand new role and title as the CEO of JERA Americas. I am honored that we've been able to land the first interview with the new CEO.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. It's a great honor. It's a great company, which I know we're going to talk about. So I really appreciate this. Thank you.
You know, one of the things that our audience has really enjoyed about these conversations is learning more about how some of our region's leaders get to where they are today. So let's start there. You and I first got to know each other back in the 90s, I believe.
Correct.
You were in the state Senate from 1992 to 1998.
Yeah.
And as someone who did congressional redistricting, I believe you were in the 2nd Essex and Middlesex
That's
district.
correct. Yes.
How am I doing there?
You're doing very well.
I was in the lower branch in the House of Representatives. But tell us more about what inspired you to even run for public office, and obviously for the state Senate.
You know, first of all, thanks for this honor to be on this podcast. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everything the New England Council does for businesses in New England, and particularly in our area, which I know we'll get into about energy, and all of the issues that are going on there are so important. So I really thank the council for everything they do, and you do. You know, I always loved politics. I grew up, before we moved, we grew up in Scituate, in the Irish Riviera, Jim, and my dad was a selectman, and my mom was very active in the League of Women Voters. We always politics was very important in our house. And then when it's a circuitous route, but my dad ended up back in Lawrence. His office was in Lawrence, and we moved to Andover, and I got to work for Pat McGovern while I was going to law school, and actually worked for Governor Dukakis in the legal office. And when that's where I learned a lot about legislation, about, you know, the working on major pieces of legislation, because, you know, she was the first woman chair of Ways and Means under Senate President Bulger. And you got to work on great bills when you were a staffer at Ways and Means. And so when she decided not to run, I wanted to run for that office. And so I ran for the seat. And at the time it was Andover, Lawrence, Tewksbury, and Billerica. My brother Tom ran the campaign, and we ran against people like the legendary William X. Wall and some others. And so, but I learned a lot running for office, and I really enjoyed it. And, you know, as you know, the Senate president would call me a juvenile delinquent. I did not vote for the Senate president when I got there. And he made me the chairman of the Vaunted Counties Committee. And the second term, he made me chairman of energy. So that's how I got into energy. But I just enjoyed the state Senate so much. And you were chair of taxation when Raytheon was in my district. And we worked on quite a bill, which was in and of itself a great learning experience.
You just mentioned William Wall. I think he has the record of taking the bar exam some 25 times, someone said to me once. Amazing.
Unbelievable.
Senator Willie Wall, they used to call him. Yeah. Wow. What memories. So what prompted you to leave the legislature and go in the private sector?
You know, when I got involved in the electric utility restructuring legislation and worked with Governor Weld was then in office. Actually, as you know, a lot of this had come up with Raytheon and sort of the price of electricity in New England. John Rowe was at New England Electric Systems, and pushing restructuring in Rhode Island. So, and actually, I always think about my Ways and Means experience. It really gave me an eye towards how you really try and put a big piece of legislation together. And so we had a really good group of colleagues who worked on that law. And by the time it was done, the pay wasn't that great, as you know, in the legislature. And we had 2 children by then. But the opportunity to work for what was then Scythe Energies, that had bought the Boston Edison assets, was really a really great opportunity. And Scythe was a great group of developers. And I'm old now, but because Mystic is being retired, but I got the opportunity to work on Mystic Units 8 and 9 and Fore River. So it was a great opportunity to head out of the legislature, and it's ended up being quite an amazing career from there.
Yeah, I mean, you've had needless to say, a very impressive career in the energy industry here in Massachusetts, including some roles with many of our New England Council members. But tell us a little more about your path and how you ended up where you are in JERA and as the COO and now as the CEO.
So my kids will remind, and my wife will remind me that we moved a lot. I was given opportunities to work in different companies. And what happened with Scythe was, as usual, not as usual, but can often happen in this industry, there are tremendous highs and lows in terms of the valuation of these assets and what happens with fuel prices and so forth. So Scythe ended up being acquired by then Exelon. And at the time, I really wanted to stay with the industry. And I was given an opportunity to go with Exelon, and we moved to Philadelphia. And I learned a lot about Exelon. Now is split into Exelon and Constellation, the generation company. But at the time, because of Exelon's ownership of the largest nuclear fleet in the country, there was a real focus on operations. And I really learned about, I'm a liberal arts guy, so I won't claim to be, and anybody watching this who has worked with me will now crack up laughing when I talk about technical issues in the energy industry, but I actually learned about operations. So at Scythe, I learned from great developers. Exelon, it was about operations in terms of how you actually think about paying attention. Safety is number one. You pay attention to the men and women who work in your power plants and making sure they go home safely every day from their job. And Exelon was really a place that focused on operations because they ran a nuclear fleet. I then got the opportunity to go to NRG. And at the time, David Crane was the CEO, and he's just finished his tenure as the Deputy Secretary of Energy in the Biden administration. David Crane really wanted to look at revolutionary technologies in the industry, solar, wind, electric vehicles, charging stations for electric vehicles. And I got the opportunity to work for Crane, building a government and regulatory affairs team. And NRG was in every market in the country, every restructured market. So I learned about PJM, New England ISO, obviously, New York ISO, California ISO, and ERCOT in Texas. So I really got a background in what went on in all of these markets. And Crane really wanted to be active in DOE loan guarantee programs and what went on down in Washington in terms of funding for these different technologies. So it was a real opportunity to work for someone who really wanted to push the envelope in terms of innovation. And from then, Jim, I can't hold a job. So I got a call from a guy who I worked for at Exelon, who was CEO of Energy Future Holdings down in Dallas, Texas. It's now Vistra. We had moved already from Philly to New Jersey to Bethesda, Maryland, and we moved to Dallas, Texas. We loved living in Dallas. My wife, Kathleen, really loved it. We had a great time there. And I was leading the government regulatory affairs and communications effort for Energy Future Holdings, or EFH. And it was a fascinating, EFH was one of the largest LBOs at the time. Goldman Sachs, TPG, and KKR had put together the money. But what happened was it was based on a gas price that totally changed with the founding of the new drilling technologies. So what had been a deal predicated on $4 to $6 gas became $2 at the time. which is good in a lot of ways, but it wasn't that good for EFH. So I learned a lot there. And then I went off to work for a Canadian company, AltaGas. We built a small power business here in the US, worked for some gas utilities. And then AltaGas said, we're going to buy Washington Gas in DC. So I told my wife, we're heading back to DC. So we headed back and worked there. And after that, worked a little bit for National Grid. And now it's an amazing thing, but I knew a guy, Steve Wynn, not the casino guy. Steve Wynn grew up in Reading, Massachusetts, and a very brilliant guy. He's at JERA, and he said, come on over to JERA. And JERA Americas is the subsidiary. And I've worked with Steve, and we'll discuss JERA, I'm sure, but it's just been an amazing opportunity here. And well, I guess the day this airs, I'll be officially the CEO, which is really amazing. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's basically, I was given opportunities to learn development, operations, the commercial side of this business, and how this business operates in major parts of the country.
It's an unbelievable background.
Yeah.
My God. But you're with a company now that is probably one of the largest in the world, but people outside the industry may not be that familiar with the company. Give us sort of a high-level overview of the company.
Sure. After the Fukushima incident in Japan, in fact, our global CEO is one of the brainchild behind this, but there was a view, and particularly in terms of Tokyo Electric, but it was to separate the non-nuclear generation business and the fuels business from the other parts of the business and create JERA. And so there's a partnership between Tokyo Electric and Chubu Electric, the number 1 and number 3 size utilities in Japan. They're our partners of JERA, and JERA is Japanese Energy for a New Era, which is JERA. And we own 30% of the generation in Japan, which is mainly gas. We do have some coal, but it's mainly gas. And the coal really came about because a lot of the nuclear units were shut down after Fukushima. So there was a real a need for rapidly developing new plants to meet power demand. And that makes us a fairly large consumer of LNG, because Japan, of course, island nation, very difficult to decarbonize, and because of limited resources and the need to import fuels. So JERA Americas is a subsidiary of JERA, and we basically have it's a three-legged stool, basically. We have the renewables business. We own a wind farm here in Texas and looking at other renewable opportunities. Talk a little bit about that when we talk about Canal. We own thermal plants like the Canal plant, Bucksport up in Maine. We own 50% of Milford and Dighton. And then we own 50% of a plant down in New Jersey and one in Philadelphia. So we have a thermal business. And then, of course, we have our LNG business. And we own a portion of the Freeport export LNG facility down here in Texas. I'm talking to you from Houston today. So, so it's basically fuels, thermal power, and renewables. And with an eye towards, particularly among the thermal plants, how can we think about using those plants to test different ways to decarbonize, sources of energy? And so that's what we're doing. And, we bought Canal with that in mind. As many know, you go over the bridge and you see that stack, and there's land there. And we've bought it because we think you can use that point of interconnect to actually either interconnect offshore wind, or in light of, the change in administration, maybe wind does not come that quickly, maybe it's battery storage instead. So that's an example of where we're trying to think about these plants and how they can be repurposed in the new energy economy.
I mean, you gave us an overview of the blueprint of your presence here. What do you see for growth in the years to come?
It's amazing. It's first of all, I don't know how much of this will happen in New England. And we just finished down here CERA Week, which is founded, by Daniel Yergin, which is the Cambridge Energy Research Associate Week, which is now a huge event. And there was a lot of talk about natural gas and the need for gas, but there was also a lot of talk about the increasing demand for electricity, particularly around data centers, around efforts to electrify the things like home heating, the chips, the semiconductor industry that's going to grow again. So there is a growing demand for electricity. Number one. Number two, that is going to lead to needs for investment in the grid, needs for different technologies to meet that growth. So it's region specific. I would say in New England, because of electrification efforts, that is going to be one area of growth. In addition to plant retirements and other, when plants go away, we're certainly going to have to meet demand somehow.
Mm-hmm. I was interested to learn that part of the reason for the strong presence in New England is that for you in Japan, is that you have similar challenges. I don't think most people think of New England having much in common with Japan. So can you explain that?
I think the big issue is lack of natural resources. Yes, we have great wind offshore. Tokyo does too. The water's a bit deep off of Tokyo Bay, but there's certainly an ability to do some of that. But if you think about energy demand in the New England region, it's somewhat similar to Japan in that it's a similar climate in terms of seasons, a similar lack of natural gas or other fuels to provide electricity 24/7. So there are some similarities in terms of each region in terms of how you try to meet electricity demand. The other thing is that is similar to New England, and now I've seen it going to Tokyo now for meetings. You really have a desire in both regions to really think about new technologies and how you really do decarbonize the system and what is affordable. One of the big issues is going to be the price of decarbonization on ratepayers and how we figure that out. And I think there's a desire for innovation in both cultures, if I might, that's a bit similar.
It seems that not a day goes by that we're not learning of new use of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
But as impactful as this new technology can be, it also requires massive amounts of energy. How is JERA and the energy industry more broadly working to meet the demands that this new technology like AI are putting out on energy systems?
You see, we're going to have some interesting policy debates. You see some companies saying, why not use an existing unit that I have, the power generation company. And others may say, well, that takes that unit off the grid. So in other words, if an AI data center, this is John Liberal Arts O'Brien here, probably needs about 4 times the electricity that a regular data center that we've been used to uses. So it's a huge amount of demand. And so we're either going to meet it with new generation, we're going to meet it maybe with existing generation that hasn't run that much on the grid, or you're going to see, and this can happen in certain places like Texas, you're going to see what we call behind the meter generation. So in other words, a hyperscaler will build its own generation. It won't want to operate the generation, but it will build its own generation, not necessarily connected to the grid. It'll build it just for its own needs. And the data centers, and we would understand this from our healthcare industry, our biotech industry in New England, needs 24/7 generation without a blip. So you're going to really need redundancy. So you're going to need, a lot of generation to make sure it's there 24/7. So there's going to be a lot of FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is involved a bit in a case in the PJM region about whether or not someone can use basically directly one existing facility, and what that means for the rest of the grid. Constellation has announced that they're working on a power purchase agreement to bring back 3 Mile Island to supply, in general, the megawatts needed for a data center down near Harrisburg or in that area. So this is going to take different forms, and it's going to really be interesting with policymakers in terms of who pays for transmission and how you meet non-data center generation needs.
You know, a topic of much discussion at the national level is energy security and decreasing America's dependence of foreign energy sources. You talk about what energy security looks like in the years to come, and the role of both renewable energy and other domestic energy sources will play.
Renewables will play a big role. There will be, this is what I've said too about, and I said this to someone recently, one of the great things that Massachusetts has done, and I think Governor Healy has done, is in this climate law that the legislature passed, and all the legislature worked on this in 2024, is money for climate tech. I think that one of the big things that Massachusetts really can do is support and invest in those technologies that are going to really mean something, be meaningful in how we decarbonize. The guy who brought me here, Steve Wynn, is much better at math than me. But he basically, says there's about 8 billion people in the world. 1 billion can basically afford what we are sort of thinking of now in the US and Europe. It's difficult to afford, but that 1 billion can afford some of the more expensive technologies right now. But the key is going to be finding technologies that are affordable in terms of avoiding carbon for the other 7 billion people. And this is one of the big issues. If we're really going to decarbonize, this is how we sort of have to look at this. For example, JERA is, we're invested in the Philippines, we're invested in Vietnam, we're invested in Bangladesh. And in each of those instances, we are talking and investing in local utilities to put in gas rather than coal, to try and move away from coal. And it's an eye opener to me when you think about the rest of the world and what people will be willing to pay to decarbonize or avoid carbon. So that's number one. That's an important role, I think, for Massachusetts. And New England, because of our universities and so forth, we can really be a climate tech leader. In terms of energy security, the US is really we sit upon a lot of natural gas. And natural gas, I know it's a big subject of controversy. It can be in New England, but it is a fuel that provides security. And so it is in all of the above that we need. We need basically that foundation that provides 24/7 power, while we're also finding and making these other technologies affordable. And the other thing you're seeing is, the ability to extend licenses for existing nuclear facilities. You're seeing the small modular reactors. People are really beginning to put a lot of investment in those. So I think from an all of the above energy story, the US is actually in a great position to be independent and to really have, a thriving energy economy.
Given the New England Council's focus on federal policy, we always like to wrap up these conversations chatting about what's going on in DC and the impact in our region. Needless to say, there is no shortage of news coming out of our nation's capital these days. But in particular, the Trump administration is certainly not as supportive of renewable energy as the Biden administration was, which is, of course, concerning here in New England, where we've seen tremendous growth, and you just talked about some of it, in the offshore wind industry. So how will the shift in priorities in terms of energy investments at the federal level impact JERA?
Well, it's a good news, bad news story. We from a natural gas perspective, and sort of the needs as we look out on the future, there are benefits. From a permitting standpoint, for all of us, renewable especially, I think there are opportunities for permitting reforms that help all of these technologies. And I think that's very important. I do think too that offshore wind, yes, the president is not a fan of offshore wind, but there are certainly other technologies here that we can be investing in as we move forward. So I think that if you think about permitting reform, some of the ways in which we can relax some of those barriers and some of the other technologies that can move forward, I think that, there's still a good combination for New England. Again, the other thing I think about New England is how do we think about what our contribution can be beyond New England in terms of new technologies, and what we've done in other industries really should be New England's strength from a jobs perspective going forward in terms of what can we do, whether it's at a Greentown Labs, whether it's at something like that or one of our universities. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of positive momentum in New England.
There's been much discussion, but unfortunately, not much action on Capitol Hill in recent years on, I think you touched on it earlier, on permitting reform. Yes. Can you speak to how permitting reform would help address some of our energy challenges, and what changes would you like to see JERA be able to see implemented?
I think that well, first of all, we have a small reform that's not at the federal government, which actually would help us at Canal, which my colleagues would really not be happy with me if I didn't mention, which is, again, the use of our interconnected canal. And there are things that we can do to share interconnections, to share transmission facilities that have already been built for existing facilities that should be easier than it is today. And that should be something that is just, an easy thing to do, is looking at areas where transmission investment has already been made that we can redirect to new technologies. I do think that at the federal level, trying to see if we can, either through FERC jurisdiction or elsewhere, eliminate, or not eliminate, but hasten some of the deadlines and the timelines to lessen the time that it takes to get from the idea of a plant to actual reality, is something that, and I was in a room with Senator Manchin here at CERAWeek where he was talking about the unfinished business that hopefully the Congress will get back to. But I think that bill, if it were resurrected, would be an example of something that would be, really of great benefit to all of us.
Is permitting a problem in Japan?
No, I think it's a bit easier there. And also when I think about, we have plants that are like 4,000 megawatts. I mean, we have very large plants in and around Tokyo. I think there's also, our Japanese colleagues looked at us a little strangely when we said we were going to buy Canal, because the first unit was built in 1968. And they looked at us saying, by law, we'd be retiring that plant. So I think there's more of a cadence to getting things built.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to join me today. And again, congratulations on your new role as CEO. Needless to say, anyone that was tuning in would find this very informative and very enlightening. I think it's safe to say that JERA Americas is in great hands under your leadership, and we look forward to more great things to come from the company here in New England. And for those of you tuning in, as always, I hope you enjoy the conversation and learn more about an innovative company in our region. So be sure to tune in next month when we'll be joined by Norfolk County Sheriff Patrick McDermott to learn more about how his office is working to prepare incarcerated individuals to rejoin the workforce in our region. Thanks for tuning in.